The Nintendo 64 Mini. Will we ever see one? Will we ever get it? G'day guys and welcome back to another video on my channel, Nintendo Down Under. Today is all about that Nintendo 64 Mini Classic because lately on my socials I've had a few people asking that question, so I thought it's time to do a video covering all of this. Do I think we're ever going to get one? I don't think we'll ever see a Nintendo 64 Mini, at least not anytime soon, and this is why. So let's take you back now all the way to November 2016 when the NES Classic launched, and that took the world and Nintendo by storm. You had to line up very early in the morning at the shops to get this, and when you got to the shops only had say 20 units, so the first 20 people would get one. They gave you a ticket and that was it. There was no more. And you'd go home and see people posting online for at least triple the price, and far out some people paid that insane amount. So Nintendo had to reprint more of these NES Classics, and in 2018, I think it was December, that's when they finally stopped printing them. And then in 2017, I think September, the SNES Classic came out, and Nintendo definitely learned from their mistakes and printed more copies of this. It wasn't as crazy in demand, and it really helped a lot of people out, and it really stuffed up scalpers, which was good, and more people had the chance to get it. But that was it. No more classics. Yes, so we had the PlayStation Classic, the SEGA one, we've had lots of other classics which have done well, but what about the Nintendo 64 Mini? So the first and biggest issue for us for Nintendo is licensing. Yes, we will have games like Mario Kart 64, Super Mario 64, Zelda Ocarina of Time, Smash Bros. It has some great games, but Rare in the Nintendo 64 days was a second party player for Nintendo, but boy, oh boy, was Rare massive. If you go on the best selling games, Rare is all over that list. So that means at the moment, with Microsoft owning Rare, we wouldn't see things like Banjo-Kazooie and Banjo-Tooie. Even though Nintendo and Microsoft are quite friendly at the moment, I don't think we'd see those games on our platform. Then you've got Perfect Dark, you've got Conker's Bad Fur Day, and then you've got GoldenEye. GoldenEye, everyone loves that game, but it's not just a licensing issue with Rare, it's also a James Bond issue. Nintendo don't have rights for James Bond anymore. Then you go to the wrestling games. The Nintendo 64 had some of the best wrestling games. Me and my friends played all different ones. If you've owned a Nintendo 64, you know what I'm talking about, but they don't have the WWE rights, so there's licensing issues for that. And then you go to some of the sports games. Sports games I'm sure wouldn't feature massively on the Nintendo 64 Mini, but we don't have their rights for EA Sports, things like that. And then you go to the Star Wars side of things. Star Wars Rogue Squadron, Nintendo don't have the rights of that anymore. So look how many black flags and dots already we would have with licensing issues with some of the best games on the Nintendo 64. Then there's the hardware side of things. To reproduce great Nintendo 64 games on the Nintendo 64 Mini / Classic, you'd need better hardware, more than the SNES and SNES, so that would become more costly. So the cost would bump up straight away, and if you're looking at hypothetically a mini console that's over $150 to around $200, and then you're getting even closer to a Switch Lite price. So not everybody there would be able to go out and afford that straight away. And then the biggest issue for me is the sizing of the box. Look at the Nintendo 64 controller. The Nintendo 64 controller is quite big and would take up a whole box space, and you definitely couldn't shrink that controller down anymore. It's already quite awkward if you've never really picked up a Nintendo 64 controller. Me growing up with it, it's fine. But if I hand a Nintendo 64 controller right now to someone who's never played it before, they have got no idea how to use it. To just shrink that just wouldn't be a good idea. So what would they have to do then? Would they have to sell the controllers separate? You'd have the Nintendo 64 Mini Classic, which would cost maybe $150 to $200, and then you'd have to buy controllers separate that might cost $10, $20, $30, $40, I don't know. Then there's the success of the Nintendo Switch console itself. It is booming, one of the best Nintendo consoles made. Sales are going through the roof. I think if the Nintendo Switch wasn't as popular and Nintendo needed to keep hitting market targets and making more money and getting their brand out there in different ways, I think side projects like the Nintendo 64 Mini Classic would definitely definitely be getting more time, but because it's so successful, there's no real reason for Nintendo to do anything like that right now. Don't get me wrong, if you're watching this video and thinking I'm quite negative about it, I don't want it, that is the complete opposite. If it costs $150 to $200, I would still go out in a heartbeat and pre-order it and get it. Because think of the potential if they did do it. I'd like to see Nintendo expand into different areas, because the Nintendo 64 Mini, well sorry, the Nintendo 64 I should say, has so many different color options. I would love to see Nintendo give that a go and make a jungle green mini, an ice blue mini, a fire orange mini, make a bit of a collection. That would be so good. Imagine a Pokemon special edition one where the mini button is the Pokeball and the reset button is Pikachu's foot. That would be so good in a mini aspect. So the potential for Nintendo to tap into that is definitely there. So I would love personally nothing more than Nintendo to come out tomorrow and say whatever that video was about that I just did was absolute rubbish, and we are making a Nintendo 64 Mini Classic. It's going to launch mid-year, late year. That would get me super excited. If Nintendo can sort out some of their licensing issues, they can find a way to keep costs down for their hardware and a way for the controller to be a part of the box or altered in some way, then Nintendo would definitely be printing money. There's no need to do that right now, like I said, because the Nintendo Switch and Lite is so successful. But if Nintendo eventually does need some sort of money grab, that option will always be there for them if they can figure out some of those issues. And even if the licensing issue with those games I mentioned before is always going to be a problem, Nintendo itself still has some amazing games. Like I said, Mario Kart, Super Mario, Zelda Ocarina of Time, F-Zero, 1080, snowboarding, Wave Race. There are so many great games that they can still make with a fantastic library, which would get me super excited. But what are your thoughts on the N64 Mini? Do you think we will see one in the near future, or will we see one at all? I'd love to hear your feedback on that one. I hope one day for some reason we really do see an N64 Classic. I grew up playing Super Nintendo as a young lad, but when I was a little bit older, Nintendo 64 is where all my memories are. I love collecting for Nintendo 64. I love playing Nintendo 64 games today. So have a HD Mini for the TV would be awesome, because let's face it, retro gaming on HD TVs just sort of sucks. The color's not the same, it's a bit more pixelated, it's expanded, it's not as good. To have a Mini would be fantastic, but the thing we can probably hope for the most right now is to have like, you know, the Nintendo Switch Online, you got the SNES Classic games and NES Classic. To have an N64 library is probably what we can hope for at best now. And will Nintendo tap into that? I think they will actually. They've done the NES, they've done the SNES, the N64, if the Switch starts to slow down near its end of its life cycle, need a pickup. That would be a great way to get people to subscribe to the Nintendo Online subscription, and that's probably the best we can hope for now. But please in the comments let me know what your thoughts are on that one. If you haven't already, guys, don't forget to like us on Facebook, Nintendo Down Under. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Nintendo Down Under. Thank you very much for watching, thank you for subscribing, and take care.